Hello. I see a few
Hello.
folks joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience while we're getting going. We actually have, it seems like maybe one of our panelists is a little bit delayed, but we're going to go ahead and take advantage of the time that we have together and and kind of proceed a little bit differently tonight. So as you're coming in, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to introduce myself and then our guest here. I'm Sue Kane, and I have the honor and privilege of leading and co-leading our Apple STEM network alongside Jenny Rojanasatian, who I believe is in the audience tonight. And we have the Apple STEM network is actually a cross-sector organization that brings together public and private and community-based organizations to expand the number of young people who are on a path to a career that they've chosen for themselves. And we know that for a lot of those young people to be on a family-sustaining career path, that also means that they need access to workforce and credentials and training. And so we're working with our legislature to expand the number of ways that young people can be successful in getting onto that path. And so we have an opportunity tonight to get to know one of the candidates for District 7. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, Mr. Lonny Williams.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for hosting it, and thanks for tuning in. Boy, just showing up is the most important thing that you can do, and getting involved is the most important thing that you can do in your communities right now. And thanks for choosing to get involved. My name is Lonny Ray Williams. I was born on a horse ranch, raised in a rural life, and joined the military at a young age and proceeded to serve my country. Went in the Presidential Honor Guard for a little bit, and then worked in the Emergency Operations Center in Washington, D.C. for a bit, and got out and worked in business in various forms and also in federal government in various forms, and ultimately retired. And after that, my wife and I, we decided to start a publication called The Pamphlet, where we investigate our history, particularly around our formative years, so that we understand our rights and our responsibilities a little bit more. And we discovered stories like Sybil Ludington, a 16-year-old girl who rode twice as far as Paul Revere. But it's not that we want to not talk about Paul Revere, but we want to let our youth know that there are other inspirational characters that they can relate to get involved with our history, because we believe our young generation will either save this country or watch it, slip into oblivion. So it's important to understand where we've come from. And in the course of that, we've had a lot of people, and we started that just for our local area, but for in our county, and it turns out that we ended up going, and we're in now all 50 states and 56 countries. And so it's grown really crazy in the past couple of years that we've been doing this. But people started asking me, hey, this is the type of representative that we want. This is the type of government that we want. You talk about it, you write about it. Would you do that? And so at first I'm like, well, that's why I'm writing, to inspire other people to do it. But then I decided, after looking in my own local area, that we have vast needs for people to stand up and represent at a local level to change government and be more represented. And so that's what started me down this path.
Awesome. And you're joining us from District 7. District 7, we've talked about, is huge. Where in District 7 are you joining us from tonight?
Yes, I live in a very rural area. Most people don't even have internet up here. We don't. I live about 6 miles outside of Republic, Washington. We don't have a stoplight in our county, and it's most roads are dirt up here, so it's completely different. But the District 7 covers 7 counties, and it's the largest in the state in the Northeast Washington, but it's also the 11th largest geographically in the nation. And covering 7 counties and 7 different diverse groups of individuals, they all need representation, and they need that type of representative who's willing to go out to them, to show up, to be there, to shake their hands, to have town halls for them so that they have access to it. And I'm committed to doing that.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to get to know you a little bit. We have a couple of questions that we prepared to ask. And as I mentioned, the STEM network is really focused on helping make sure that there are equitable opportunities for young people in our rural and remote communities to be able to access training and skills and credentials to be able to get jobs and be a part of our community and our society. So We actually know that that starts actually with access to early childcare and education programs. We know that education and early learning provides a strong foundation and that there's spillover effects. Children, when we invest in them in a young age, it's actually linked to a stronger economy and increased caregiver job stability and a reduction in the cost of special education, healthcare, criminal justice spending later. So we also know that there's significant shortages in early learning and care options for families. What do you think would need to be done first to expand access to high quality early learning for children and families in our region?
Boy, I've been raising kids for a little while. Between hers, mine, and ours, we have 8 children. My oldest is
Wow.
30. My youngest is 1, and I have 3 that are 4 and under. And just the how they were raised is completely different. So I would have answered this a lot differently a few years ago than I would answer it now in my own experiences. We have since taken our education of our children into our own hand, and we have seen them absolutely blossom and explode. And so I know that number one, parents are the most important factor in raising that children. So we must get parents engaged. And that starts with making parents the primary stakeholders in their children's upbringing. That's something that we all need to agree on, and government needs to understand that parents need to be allowed to be engaged in the upbringing of their children. For many thousands of years, we know that mothers are the best caretakers of their children historically, and they need to be allowed to get involved and not be run out of school meetings. And we've created a lot of politicization in our education system, and we need to take a step back and figure out, gee, how can we get parents to actually be able to say, look, I know Jimmy, I've raised him since, well, he was 0, and he has an interest in cars. So perhaps we can get him in a vocational program that's going to make sense, to where he likes to work on cars and he's passionate about that. And lo and behold, he ends up being a heavy diesel mechanic. Perhaps he serves some terms in the military, works on some tanks. I mean, there's a lot of cool things that Jimmy could do if we empower him. But who knows best about that than a parent? And we need to make sure that parents feel empowered instead of antagonized. So where is the relationships gone bad? How can we improve those sort of things? Government typically doesn't make a good nanny, and so parents typically make great parents. But so where can we improve and give parents the tools they need to be great, fantastic parents? Empower them. So I believe, number one, we need to make sure we get parents involved and that they are allowed to be involved, and that there is a relationship that is focused on upbringing that child. The child needs to be number one. That's our future. That's every country's future, every generation's future. In my life, my goal is to have children that have it better for me, that are smarter than me, that have better opportunities than me. And I don't see that happening over in my vast experience of raising children. I think that things are a lot more challenging now. And we need to figure out, how do we raise children perhaps differently? And maybe that's looking back in the past and saying, what worked historically? And there's some really cool things I've written about it. 1776, the beginning of the civil, or excuse me, that was our first Civil War, that Revolutionary War. Women's literacy was at 60%. But by 1800, it was 100%. Same thing in white male populations. They were even educating their slaves because they felt that they had a divine thing to educate everyone under their care, children, everybody else. And with education, with literacy, comes liberty. People are able to read, they're able to see for themselves, experience for themselves. And with our literacy on the critical decline, what have we lost? We've lost liberty. We've lost a lot of these things. We've gained a lot of protectionism and things like that. But how is that impacting our education? One size fits all doesn't work for education, because we have a diverse amount of people. Many people want to raise their children in their own cultures, and they should be encouraged to do that. That's why we want to make parents the primary stakeholders. If we have great Latino communities, they have great, strong family heritage. They should be encouraged to and allowed to live in that way. We have great heritage from across the planet has come here in this melting pot, and many people just want the best for their children. but they should be allowed to raise them in their own cultures and in their own ways. That's how our founding fathers came here for that reason. We should make sure that we allow that.
Yeah, that seems to me a perfectly sensible place to start as far as the first place uh, to go for expanding access. I wonder, and it makes me, the next question that I had on my list was actually talking about how we're as a state engaging in helping young people imagine their futures. And the state has invested in this process called high school and beyond planning that's supposed to, the intent of it would be at about 8th grade, students are starting to explore potential career paths and starting to say with their own voice, here's the kinds of things I like, here's what I think I might want to do. And they are continuing to work on that plan through high school. But the goal is to actually have a footpath that they're following with the classes that they pick for themselves in high school and beyond to prepare for future careers. And so the question that we had is, as we're doing this, what can the state do to ensure that schools have the resources that they need to support youth in that planning for their future career paths?
I think we need to look at education in a little bit different. For a long time, we focused very heavily on public education. And as we've pumped more money into it, our test scores have gone down. And it's not because teachers don't have the desire to teach. I mean, my family on both sides, I have a daughter who's a teacher. My wife's mom is a teacher. They're certainly paid well. They certainly put many hours into trying to do things. But what's going on? What's challenging? We're starting to put teachers in a role of now social and emotional learning when there's, we need to figure out what the role of education system is. Is it to actually provide our children the greatest opportunity to be the best versions of themselves? Or is it to try and teach them how to act and how to behave because the parents aren't engaged in that when they come to the education system? Now, when I was young and in high school, I took 3 years of German, and I remember studying during that. Of course, I can't speak it now because I haven't spoken it since. But I remember studying about the German education system, and I was fascinated by it because at 14, people make a choice in there. Are you going to be in an industrial life where you're going to work in factories, and this could be high-end factories to where you're in engineering and hands-on development, or are you going to go on a science level to where it's going to require massive amounts of education, many years ahead, and so at a young age, people know that they're making this choice at about 14. And if I look back on my high school years, from 14 to 18, it was a lot of goofing off and a lot of learning some things and a lot of social playing around, but ultimately it wasn't spent on developing myself or on a career path. And yet the German system is based on that because the people that you play with, hang out with, play football with, they're all now working on that same type of career path. And so they think it, they associate it, they all become better engineers, they become better mathematicians or better whatever it is they're going to work in. And by and large, it was at least interesting enough to get me to think that at a younger age, we ought to start guiding our children more specifically down the age that we need, especially nowadays. At 18, I mean, my first children grew into cell phones as they started happening. Nowadays, children are able to do vastly more things at a younger age. So we need to look at our education system as well and say, okay, but at the same time, we have critical shortages of welders and construction workers and basic people who require some serious math or decent math and some good skills. And so we need to make sure we could produce those as well. If you had welding skills and set up shop here in Ferry County, you'd make a killing. I mean, there's a shortage in things because we've heavily invested on heavy long-term education plans. And really right now we have a shortage in this country of maybe technical skills or maybe people focused in those areas to hold our country together, how to operate a dam, how to keep our electricity going, things that still require some good technical skills, but we haven't done a good job as society as making those skills sexy. Everyone wants to be okay, where can I make the most amount of money? Okay, we're all going to go to school and get our MBA. That's what it was in the 80s and 90s is like, go get your MBA, you're going to make your money. So everyone got an MBA. And not very many businesses really care if you have an MBA, if that's, sure, that's great. You can balance my books, but can you make a taco if running a food service business? You want someone who has those sort of skills.
Yeah.
So we need to do better jobs of allowing our people to be the best versions of what they can. And I think they'll sort themselves into those likes, especially when money's involved. Like, hey, $100 an hour for doing welding. I can run my own gig. That sounds really good right now. Compared to going to school for 8 years, becoming a doctor, having to pay out all that and still making $100 an hour. Somebody might think about that and say, I didn't know that was even a thing, or I so would have been a welder. 4 years into med school, and you're thinking, gosh, look at all this debt. And my buddy Joe, who we hung out with high school a couple of times, he's raking in all this cash. I liked welding. I didn't know that was a thing that we could make money on. So we just need to educate people that turn your skills and your passions into income, reinvent cottage industries. So much is based on globalism and big corporations and supporting that system, when if we empower individuals to start their own businesses, to get excited about their passions, whether it be photography or welding or underwater basket weaving. I don't know, what if you can make money at it and it improves the economy, then let's do it.
Well, it's actually a perfect lead into the question that we had about career and technical education. And career and technical education is actually supported by federal policy as well as state policy. But in Washington State, 7th through 12th graders have access to CTE classes through their middle school and their high schools. And these are the classes that you're talking about, the welding classes or the STEM and the robotics types of classes. Those are actually built in partnerships between schools and local industry. And it can be really hard to build that relationship up between the schools and local businesses. Most of the time that's done through an advisory, and it can be specific for the program, but those advisories, it's an opportunity for local industry, for cottage industry, if you will, to actually have a say in what is part of the school day. So I'm wondering, what can Washington State do to strengthen those partnerships and relationships between schools and industries so that you do have a better alignment there?
There's a lot of regulation and bureaucracy that gets in the way. And then I just want to talk about agriculture, because that's my wheelhouse, and the 7th district is heavily agricultural related. We have over 1 million acres of just straight farmland. So with that in mind, though, we have a hard time keeping people interested in farming. We don't make it sexy, we don't make it interesting, and we make it difficult to stay in. And the reason we make it difficult to stay in is when I grew up at 8 years old, I started hauling hay. At 12 years old, I would go work for somebody else at a nickel a bale, helping them load hay. At 14 years old, I could drive a truck on the road as long as I had some hay in the back in my rural area, and I was contributing to the farming capacity. And at 15 years old, I got my first real job bagging groceries, because you could do that at 15. At 16 years old, I went to work for Burger King, became a shift supervisor. So by the time I was 16, I already had my own vehicle. I was looking for stereos and cool things to purchase. And, it was vastly different than the economies we have today. But you know what? There were some really good values in that system, but we overregulate it to where companies really can't allow their youth in. You've got insurance liabilities. You've got, well, if they do it, they have to take this test and this test. You've got to send them to the health department to go do this. They've got to, go through the same process and everybody else. So although legislators often have great motives for passing many things, what is the carry-on effect when we shut down opportunities for our children to learn how to enter the workforce? It shouldn't start at 18 when all of a sudden they're graduating. It's like, what are you going to do? It's like, I don't know. What are you going to do? Well, I guess I can go apply for work down at the mill if they're hiring anybody. I mean, we can do so much better than that, especially today with the technology that we have. I remember in college, 5 years of college, and in each of the 3 colleges I attended, one of the main things they want to do is send you through the psychological battery so you understand yourself, how you think. Are we doing that to our children? Are we helping them say, hey, you know what? I think I like cars, but I don't like to work that hard, so maybe I should be a tour guide. I mean, it used to be something that we integrated to a minimalistic degree when I went to school. Um, and I'm pretty sure we've gotten away with that just because there's so many other things that people say, well, you need to teach this, you need to teach this, you need to teach this, and this. And it's like, oh, by the way, maybe we can get around to math. I mean, we had an experience where we pulled our daughter out of school and she was an A and B student. And when we had her tested, she was 3 grades behind. She couldn't read, she couldn't write, she couldn't form sentences nor do math, and she didn't know history. She didn't know where we had come from. All we did is spend enormous amounts of money on teachers' books and teachers' editions from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. We went into older programs that are just non-biased, just straight education. And lo and behold, few years later, she is a genius. She has confidence in herself. She's a president of a Turning Point USA activist hub. She's like, I'm getting involved in politics and I'm going to take charge of my life. Whereas before, she just didn't want anything to do with it. We didn't do anything other than turn her loose and let her know that she can do anything that she wants if she puts her mind to it. And how can we do that in our public education system? We certainly must, but we must have other opportunities as well for that to bloom, so that we can see not all children might fit into that. Some people might have autistic children. And maybe we need to have some specialized schools for that. And we need to focus on funneling education dollars to the student, not on buildings. That way, you know, if we have a child who is autistic, and look, we spend $18,000 per year in this state. I know not all of it could go to that's attached to the child, but just imagine if we could attach $18,000 to that student. Because if that child is autistic, that $18,000 could go to the autistic school that is teaching them. There is a financial motivation attached to educating that child and providing them. Perhaps I have 2 nephews they're full spectrum, so I totally get it. But perhaps we can bring that child into a functioning life where maybe they'll be able to live on their own one day. And whereas before we're just putting them in a public school system that maybe has a special needs program that sometimes has abuse issues, sometimes not. We need to think differently, because who knows best what that child needs? Well, a parent. And if a parent can say, look, my child's really, really cool with this whole mechanical thing, then great. You go to Jimbo's trucking school. I mean, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but holy cow, this guy could be a genius in designing some of the best trucks in the world if we just let him, you know, imagine and go with that imagination and say, look, let's unlock this kid's potential. And you know, just a one size fits all public school as it currently isn't serving the needs of the diverse communities and populations that we have, especially in the complex economies. Think of the hundreds of thousands of jobs that we have in many different categories. Some are like 10, there's only 10 in the world, but if you study to do this, you can make some good money. But yet everyone focuses on the main thing, you know, maybe what's on TV, but we need to do a better job, especially with the technology that we have today, in actually identifying what do you want to be and how can we make you the best version of yourself. We certainly should be able to do that with our children.
Well, I'll tell you that the mom and me, my heart was happy to hear, and hopefully your daughter is listening, as her dad tells everybody that she is a genius, because that makes me really happy as a mom. Every daughter should have that moment.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think if I can pull one more question out of that, you know, that career and education connection thread, right?
Uh-huh.
We've been working on some things across the region called career connected learning opportunities. And it includes things like internships and apprenticeships and different career explorations, and really kind of playing with that interface between your education part of your life and your career part of your life. And we really do want to help youth kind of find that place that unlocks their potential, as you said. So what needs to be done to ensure that we have those kinds of opportunities, or that they continue to expand in District 7? And I'll frame that with an extra little caveat, because we're a kind of rural and remote sort of sprawling region, right? So it's a different sort of challenge when you're trying to build those kinds of things across a rural community.
And there is a tremendously large portion of children within the seventh that is homeschooled, co-op schooled, Christian schooled, private schooled, online school, it's significant. And we need, you know, we're actually a wonderful district because it allows us to solve those challenges for the rest of the state that might not have such the proportions that we do. We can actually create a model within these counties to figure out, okay, how do we address the needs? Co-ops are a great thing. Maybe there are libraries that we could get involved with, to expand either our library system or have like a homeschooling library where there are mentors or things like that.
Mhm.
Programs to where public school and some private school, so that kids who want to get into music and play with bands or go join on cheerleading team. I know when we made the transition, our daughter was still allowed to go and be on the cheerleading team at the local school for a year, and she chose to do that. So just so that they can have those opportunities actually helps them excel and thrive in both worlds. So I think we need to open our minds as far as what's possible. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think that's just looking at things differently, because
Mm.
we haven't been meeting the needs of our children. We haven't been meeting the needs of our parents. And everyone has the desire, I believe, to educate the children to the best of their ability. And so what we need to do is make sure that we empower parents to be the primary stakeholders to say, okay, I am going to be the champion of my child. I'm going to make sure that this money is going to that is designated for this child will go to this school, or may this kid is at 4 years old, been playing the piano. We need to make sure that they are really going into music. We must have those opportunities for those people, because we are a spread out world. And we are a diverse world. But imagine if in the rural mountains of Republic, there is a Beethoven who all of a sudden, because we open up the opportunities for that individual to come down and take some piano lessons with my wife or whatever, and get, do those sort of things and connect people. Government's not a very good nanny or a healthcare provider, but it is an excellent collector of information and a good clearinghouse of information. So it's great that government could provide services to say, hey, if you're looking to raise your children in this or this, then here you can go here, and that's where government could provide a good service rather than trying to take over and provide a one size fits all system for our children. Maybe that worked 100 years ago, but it doesn't work in our environment now, and we can and we must do better. And it should start with empowering the family to be the family. And let's focus on that family again and let them be the brightest shining star that they're going to be, whatever they're going to be. That's up to them. Let's empower them for that and embrace them and say, wow, look what a diverse community of shining stars we have.
Mhm. Well, I have a few more questions I could ask, but I'm gonna ask you one more, but I'm also gonna ask the folks that are joining us if there's a question that you have that you want to put into the Q&A. I'll ask mine and then we'll switch over to yours. So you need a little bit of time to type. So I'm telling you, it's coming. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to turn it over and ask your questions. But I want to talk a little bit about just how we talk about our STEM economy: science, technology, engineering, and math. And the region is actually a wealth of STEM economy and some growing industry in agriculture, as you mentioned, manufacturing. We've got some aerospace and some definitely some big tech sector developments. And so as this presents kind of a growing demand for healthcare and education and skilled workers, what needs to be done in our region to support workforce development efforts so that there's alignment between that growing industry need? We can't continue to just import people to meet that workforce need. So what can we do to make sure that those opportunities are equitably accessible to the young people who are coming up in this region right now?
That is so critical, especially for rural areas, which much of Washington is. Yes, you have your powerhouse population centers, but by and large, geographically, much of Washington is rural. At least the vast majority of many of these smaller school districts are rural. They serve different communities. And so the challenge we need is to empower these school districts to be unique to their geographic area. We need to get the state out of mandating a one size fits all education system, because within the 7th, we have a heavily agricultural system. And what I hear the most out of most of the voting, the elderly voting bloc, is that we have been training our children for jobs in the city, and they have left our counties, and we have no people to run our local farms, our local buildings, our local real estate agents. And so then people come in from the city with different ideologies who don't necessarily know how to interact yet in a rural environment. And you have clashes in between how people interact with each other. And then you have social tearing and different like that in communities. And then it starts getting, heck, throw a pandemic in there, and then everyone's angry at each other. So we need to start looking at, why aren't we educating the children within each area for the jobs and for the passions of theirs? Certainly people can go wherever they want, and should, if they have a passion, like I said, for music or whatnot, but they should be able to say, well, I can train to be a farmer rather than having to go to a city, to go to a university to learn about agriculture, to then come home and try and make it, and apply. So we need to think a little bit differently on how we're doing things. And I think regional wise or county wise, empowering local districts to be unique. And when I was going to school, we had auto shop, wood shop, those sort of things. We had FAA things, and so those should be empowered, supported. That's where funds should be for those counties. Whereas in city, you might need more transit operators and things like that, but we don't have a need for subway operators in Republic. We have dirt roads. So, but yet the education system is a one size fits all bloated system, and it doesn't serve individuality, which we should be champions of.
Mhm. Well, we have our first audience question that's come in. And so Linda would like to know, with workforce development in mind, what would be your plan to support small schools with the development of their career and tech ed programs, so that they can offer both exploratory and preparatory types of opportunities for students?
Oh, that is an excellent question. We need to get kids on the farms, or touring the orchards, or touring the fish hatcheries. And we need to get them out of the classroom as much as they are in the classroom. Because when children are in a classroom setting and behind a book, they have a tendency to tune out. So at least half of their time should be out in the world, seeing different things around them. Hey, this is Farmer Ted. This is how he milks his cows. And these sort of things. Look, here's a welder. Here's how he fixes a building. A hands-on experience gives these children not only a deeper understanding, but develops an excitement about it when they see something that really piques their imagination. You can show a video, you can have a textbook, but by and large, children are visual learners. They like to go places on adventures. And in this world, yes, we have all the technology in the world to bring some of those things out, but we need to get out of these. Look, most people spend the time like this all day long. And we need to not add that in the classroom as much either. We need to pull them out and have them look at the world for what it is, because maybe at home, that's all the time they get is behind their thing. We need to teach people that there is a real physical world, and wherever we can in our education system, we must embrace getting them out to interact in the real world and experience it in person as much as old school education. We just need to look at education a lot differently, kind of like they did back in our founding fathers areas. They did have book time and learning time, but much of their education was on hand. Okay, I'm going to send my kid over to the blacksmith. They're going to learn how to be the blacksmith for a little while, and then I'll send them over here to learn how to make candles, and they'll earn a little bit of money doing that. We should have tear down the barriers where farmers are terrified that some kid's going to slip and fall and get sued because they stepped in cow poo or something like that. We need to make sure that there's either liabilities that you're taking care of, or some sort of programs to where businesses are not afraid to bring these kids on their property anymore, because there's huge liability issues now to even make that happen. Whereas before it's like, be back by dinner and we don't care what happens to you if you skin your knees. It's a different society now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting observation too, because I think we share a passion for getting youth into a workplace. I think for me, it's really about helping youth connect to the professionals and have those relationships with professionals and have exposure and awareness to the adults in the system as well. But I hear you talking about actually getting your hands dirty and having some hard work as well. And I think both of those things would be really valuable for more young people to have opportunities.
Some kids love to get dirty. You let them do it. I mean, when I first, my first child, you're paranoid. You're like, oh, don't get dirty, don't breathe on them, don't sneeze on them. I'm a pig farmer now, and so my kids like literally can get out right on the pigs, and they're stepping in pig poo and everything. I don't really care. They're having fun. And their immune system's amazing. Whereas my older kids growing up in the city, they always had a sniffle about everything. So I don't know, be a pig farmer and your immune system's great. But I'm just saying that maybe we shelter ourselves too much as humanity, because at least in my experience with my younger kids, letting them get out and experience life on a homestead, on a farm, to where they can chase chickens, throw firewood, do sort of things like that, they are doing so much better and are way more engaged socially and in every other way than my older children. And I wish there was a manual when you have children to tell them what the best way to raise everybody is. And maybe we just need to relook at how we've lost some of the things that actually might have taught ourselves some really cool values.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to ask just one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to y'all. So again, if you have some questions, send us your questions. But we wanted to end our questions for you with something that is pretty positive, and ask you, what's something that you're particularly optimistic about as you maybe look to heading into a legislative session?
Well, you know what? I am optimistic about people finally starting to get back involved in their political life. For a long time, we've ran away from it because it's ugly, it's hideous, people are mean to each other. But by and large, the only people running the shop were those people who were like that. And what I see now is a grassroots movement of common everyday mom and pops who are about in the middle of everything, not necessarily to the left or to the right, but yet common sense, constitutionalists, pro civil liberties, and pro personal responsibility, who say, look, enough of the nonsense. Let's give me my government back. I want my representation back. I want that representative government that we read about in history class that says, when I elect somebody, they have to vote how I want them to vote, not how they think they should. And nowadays, oh, you can't have that anymore. That's an old idea. Baloney. All it takes is someone to actually do it. And that's what I'm running on. And I'm hopeful that I get to demonstrate that I can do 7 town halls in 7 counties and make sure that everybody gets to come and say, okay, this is how I want you to vote, or I'd like this amendment on there. And can you do that? And I was like, okay, I'll put it forward. And then that way, look, if somebody has to lobby me, guess what? They have to come in that same public forum. And I get to say, look, you know what? Tesla says they want a charging center on every corner. What say you? And I turn it to the people, and the people say, it's just a little bit too much. Every corner, I don't know, maybe every 7 blocks. Either way, they need to make the decision, not me, because I met some guy in some smoky dark room and he decided to pledge some money to my campaign or some charitable. We need to get away from that. We need a representative government. And that's what I'm trying to stand for. If I can do it in 7 counties, holy cow, think of what we can do. We can bring our representation back. And just because I have an R by my name doesn't necessarily mean that I don't have to represent everybody. We have a lot of people who can't participate in the process. There are people for religious reasons aren't allowed to. And how do we represent them? We need to be aware of what their needs are and make sure that we carry their voice silently forward. There are plenty of people who are on the Democratic side who say, look, I need to be represented as well. You're absolutely right. Show up at the meeting like everybody else. You guys have a right to tell me what you feel. And we need to bring that back, because by and large, it should be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I want to try and bring that civility back. I know it sounds like a tall order, especially nowadays. I mean, many of us do a lot of talking and not a lot of listening. And I'm hopeful that we can have a civil discourse and say, look, let's come together and say, these are the bills that are up. These are the issues that are on the floor. What say you? And if we can actually do that, if we can bring that government back, think of how much better we will be, because the issues that we, the people, actually have, inflation, feeding ourselves, educating our children, that becomes the primary issue. Instead of the politicization on the left or the right, we need that representative government somehow. And that's why we teach history. So I'm hopeful that I see a lot of this, that people are starting to look and say, I don't know what's wrong, but I know that it's broken. And where do I go? Well, I would suggest we look in our history, because they have all the solutions there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have a First Amendment, and of there, the most important part of that is freedom of association. What? Wait, that's the first move. That's the most, yeah, because guess what? That's what formed our country. These people, our founding fathers said, look, we're tired of this taxes. We're going to associate and just agree not to buy tea and British goods. They associated, they came together, they formed a peaceful solution, and they decided that's what they were going to do. That's what we need to do as people, is come together as associations, say, look, I'm a concerned parent. Education isn't going the way I want. Let's do something about it. And they do it. That's what we need to bring back, is people, communities. For a couple of years now, we've been divisive and say, no, you stay home, you stay home. And, there are some people who are emerging from a cocoon who hasn't talked to anybody in 2 years. And you can see it. They want to try and say hello, but they're like, I don't want to upset them. And so we need to figure out a way to bring everybody back to the table and say, we can fix this because we're Americans. We do best when we come together and under a common solution. And right now, the thing that's really broke the most is our government. And we just need better people to run, who want to represent, and get rid of the prideful people, and we can do it. And I know it's a unique message, but I'm hoping that somebody hears it. I'm hoping that we get this type of government. I hope that we can empower our children to be the education that fits them like a glove. I'm hoping that we can turn this community around and say, look, let's focus on what it's like to be Americans. Let's focus on our liberties and our responsibilities, and beyond everything outside of that, let's agree on, but let's make sure that we have our liberties and our responsibilities intact. And so I'm hopeful, because I see some people starting to say, we need solutions because what we're doing is not working. So there is some sort of awareness happening, and I'm hopeful, and that more people stop watching Netflix for 5 minutes and say, hey, we need to fix our country because we're in a pretty ugly situation. And I'm seeing that. So, and that's making me feel pretty good. It's a hard fight, but it's worth it. Our children are worth it. That's why I'm doing this. I mean, I've got 8 kids, and I want the best for them. And I've got 3 grandchildren, and I want the best for them, and so on. I want the best for all of our kids. I didn't serve in the military to retire and be upset at the world because it didn't work out. No, I'm getting back in the saddle. I mean, I could easily just quit and ride off into the sunset, but I'm not like that. I'm going to fight for this. It's worth fighting for. And I encourage everybody to do that. So I'm hopeful, because there are signs of life in this country. And it's against the establishment on both sides. People hate it when I say that, but look, it's really about common people who want their government back, and we need to empower that, because most of us could be happy over a cup of coffee or a cup of orange juice, whatever people drink, and talk, if you just strip the politics out of it, because we want the best for our children, we want the best for our nation. And it used to be that we could have those conversations, and nowadays we've gotten away from that. I say it's we can go back. It's not too far gone. So that's what I'm fighting for, and I see that signs of life are happening. So it's a beautiful thing. So I'm hopeful.
I like that. I think there's notes in there of optimism about gathering and about specific reform and responsibility. These are great. These are great things to be optimistic about. So
Absolutely.
you have a question that came in. Tammy wants to know about small school funding, and she's explaining that career and technical education is funded based on a formula that's tied to student enrollment, and small schools don't always draw the enrollment they need to build these programs. Do you have any ideas or thoughts about a plan for how we could help them with funding?
Absolutely. And here's the model. The model is that you tie the education dollars to the student. And at first, that's a big shock to the public education system that is just sucking all this away. But like everything else, our children deserve the best education possible. And when parents are allowed to say, look, my child needs this best type of education, and they're allowed to direct where that money goes, I believe in capitalism. I absolutely believe in it, and our founding fathers believed in it. And when it's employed and let people determine what's best, then what's going to happen is, I believe, because I know I have some in my family, there are some fantastic educators who just want to provide the best education possible. They're going to go to the places that are providing the best education possible. With this competition, there will be private schools, there will be public schools, there will be homeschools, there will be people who take it to Catholic school or to business school or trucking school or whatever it is. There will be things that people are empowered to do, and we need to let that money go. And so competition will dry up some areas, but competition is always good. You know, we will get rid of bad administrators in our public school who are not competitive and who do not properly fund it. We have some educators, and you know, on a local level, we had a challenge to where we had some administrators who were running the school in the ground and not taking care of it because they wanted a new school. Well, we, the people, didn't want a new school. We wanted them to maintain the one that was already built. And so, you know, we need to make sure that, well, that would solve those issues, because look, they would then compete and say, look, we need to run a lean, mean fighting machine to compete for those dollars. And that means that these programs are going to be designed to and streamlined to ensure that children have a world-class education within our facility. And we will make sure that when we're looking for those type of superintendents to employ and looking for those type of elected officials to run the school system, that those are the issues that they're running on. Because when they're elected, then we, the people, have that option to say, okay, you're running for school board position too. You're competing for a lot of dollars. What are you going to do to make sure that the school system is operating fiscally responsibly, which doesn't happen, and within certain boundaries to attract students? Those would be the qualities we would then elect into our school board positions, because we know those are the qualities that are necessary to keep the public as institution alive. And so we, the people, choose people differently. And then other institutions get a bump initially until they realize, well, look, you know what, they can't really compete over here. My kid, you know, wants to play football. He wants to go here and be part of this and hang out. So the natural balance will happen. But right now, the one size fits all means that there's inefficiency and bloated. And also there's teachers who are just kind of cramped. I want to be a good teacher, and they only have, look, the public institution. Imagine that every county had 4 or 5 choices, smaller perhaps, and then maybe there was a larger central, but there would be, you know, the Juilliard of Ferry County, or, you know, we would have these fine shining institutions that would be created in these, and then you'd be like, hey, someone's coming over here from Texas because they heard that if you want to learn how to raise this type of cattle, you go here. And then all of a sudden you have families that are starting to move in, and you're creating diverse societies because, hey, they have a really cool education system over here in Washington State, because you can actually be the best thing that your children's going to be. You know, you go to just about any county there and they got 4 or 5 schools to choose from, and a public system or a public transportation system that's perhaps built to accommodate that, or a school bus system that runs routes to drop them all off. There's so many ways that we can do this if we just allow parents to become those primary stakeholders and get involved. Because then they can say, hey, well, my kid needs this. And that's great. Let's see how we can make that happen. And you get 7 kids thinking the same thing. It's like, okay, well, it doesn't happen in this county, but it's a neighboring county. Let's send a shuttle bus every 2 days or something like that. There's so many ways that we can just look at this. But if we just think outside the box. When I was in the military, when I was given an order, I didn't say, sir, I'm sorry, that hill's too tall. I'm not going to climb it. The order was to climb the hill. So I had to use my brain to look at all the different avenues and the ways that I had to march up that hill and take that hill. Now, going straight up the middle was often the worst approach. So we need to approach our life and our education system just the same way. There's not just one way to do it, and we need to look at it depending on who the child is, and create a tailored system to where we create a society that is the best education system on the world. We used to be pretty high on the scale, but we've fallen so much. What are some of the other nations doing? Well, I've looked at what they're doing. They're catering programs and allowing the individual to be the best person that individual can be. And we're missing the mark because we're plugging it into this public system that is antiquated at best. So let's just not miss any more opportunities. We've lost 2 years because of kids learning at home and things we didn't know what we were doing. And there's no matter what, we're going to have an entire generation of young people who grew up differently than the rest of us. They're going to be socially impacted by that. Some of them missed prom, some of them missed graduation, some of them didn't have that moment they were looking forward to all life. We had a son like that who fell right into that category. So as we go forward, these fundamental shifts are going to impact people. What better time now when education is already a mess trying to recover from that we say, okay, let's create the best system imaginable. Let's create some triage units to where we can take these children and these children and these children because they're struggling. What do you need? Let's get them a guidance counselor and say, okay, let's focus on basic math. I know as a parent who has re-educated their child completely from scratch and taught them how to read, write, and it can be done in a short period of time. If we have the energy, the drive, the passion to understand that this is the future generation of our country, and we must treat our children like that.
Well, that's a pretty good, that's a very thorough response there, and a pretty good synopsis, and maybe even a great note to be able to wrap up on as far as, just the focus of the work that we do, whether it be in legislation or in our collective impact work as a STEM network, that we ground all of it around children and what they need to be successful. I just want to take a moment to thank you for taking some time out this evening and sharing your thoughts with us. And folks,
thanks for having it. This is great.
If they've got additional questions, they can send you a message or send you an email.
Absolutely. www.lonnyraywilliams.com. That's LONNY. A lot of people misspell it. I completely get it. Or just contact at lonnyraywilliams.com. I also have a 1-800 number, 1-833-728-2228. I believe that you should have access to your representative. You should be able to call your representative and say, hey, I need a little bit of clarification here. That's the type of government that we should get back to. That's what I stand for. You can reach me anyway, and I'll get back to you, and I'll represent you, and I'll do your best. So I'd greatly appreciate your vote, and thank you so much for showing up tonight. This is fantastic.
Yeah, it was a really good conversation. I really enjoyed hearing your thoughts and getting to know you a little bit. Still sort of in shock and blown away that you are the parent of 8 children, and
yeah, it's
for the campaign season. So
something in the water, I guess.
That's pretty remarkable. Well, it's really nice to meet you. Thank you again for your time, and thanks for joining us tonight. For the folks that are on the line, hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. God bless. Have a fantastic night.